The other day, I was looking at real full-time earnings for blokes in the US because I was looking for something that's sort of not being distorted by things like, gender equality, higher female workforce participation, all that sort of stuff. Because obviously that's going to push number up. But if you look at just blokes and compare that over time, men in America today, in real terms, earn roughly as much from their full-time employment as they did in 1979, 46 years ago. And that is an astounding fact. And that's assuming taking the very, very big leap that the CPI has accurately measured inflation over those past 46 years, which I've got a chart on that later in the show, which I don't think it has.
Yeah, absolutely. And we keep saying, well, people have gone backwards over the last decade plus, but not everybody. And the other point there, if you look at the few percent and their growth of wealth and income relative to everybody else, well, they've had a really good time. And the tech bros are having a wonderful time in the US with what's going on. So again, you've got these distributional things, which I don't think are being discussed sufficiently either, because at the aggregate level, if you have a small proportion of very, very wealthy people expanding their overall footprint and wealth, et cetera, when you actually aggregate that together, you might have a top line number that looks reasonable. But when you look at the distributional aspects, that's when it really hits.
It does. Moody's actually did a paper on this a few months ago, which was absolutely excellent, top tier stuff. And what they did is they broke down US household consumption by decile. So like the top 10%, next 20%, so on and so forth. And basically what it showed was that over the last 30 odd years, that everyone except the top 10% had seen their share of overall consumption fall. So we're not talking about it just being Joe Average falling behind.
Mm.
We are talking about like the literal sort of entry level millionaire class falling behind relative to the billionaire class. So I think that that's a rather sort of just interesting look at just how things are playing out. And I did a little bit of math and I played around with it, the numbers, I converted it into per capita terms. And what I figured was that if you were to somehow magically impose the 1990s distribution of household consumption on the US, the bottom 60% would see their consumption rise by almost a third. And I think that's a rather striking number to just be possible in a society that is ostensibly a democracy, but is moving more and more towards arguably feudal type consumption patterns.
Yeah, well, I remember talking with Michael Hudson, the famous economist, a few years ago, and we were talking about the debt slave. And he was making the point that the debt slave is nothing new. You can go back centuries and you can see it, Greece, Rome, etc., etc. But the idea is there that you've got no choice but to, work to be able to actually survive, and in so doing, incurring, debt and along the way, because effectively, the system is not designed to lift you out of that. The system is designed to keep you trapped within it. And if you look at what's happened, that is precisely what's happened over the last 30 years. So more people are trapped in this system where the only thing they can do is to try and work as hard as they possibly can to service the debt or the rental that they've got, to be able to try and survive, to work hard, to be, you got this perpetual motion. And meanwhile, in the feudal system, you never get very far, but the few at the top actually are winners left, right, and centre. And nothing has changed. We're still in this same feudal structure. It's just that we might call it something a bit different because of the new labels and things, but nothing's fundamentally changed.
I think the problem is that feudal systems and feudal type distributions of wealth are the default setting of humanity. I know it sounds horrible, and I know it's perhaps a challenging thing to confront, but if you look at how different shall we say, advanced civilizations distributed wealth, once they reached that sort of level of technological advancement. Like you look at even say, for example, South America disconnected from what was going on in Europe or Africa or Asia for basically millennia. And they still had the same type of feudal distribution of wealth and power that was seen in Europe or Africa or Asia. So I think the problem is that it is very much the default setting of humanity. But what we saw perhaps during the late 19th and, probably throughout most of the 20th century was the middle class gaining a degree of leverage, a degree of power that they never really had before in the same in such a explicit way. The mob has always had power. I mean, you had the People's Tribune in Rome over 2,000 years ago, but in terms of actually being able to influence policymakers and outcomes, that's something that's, in such a significant way, that's something that's been more rare. But now we're arguably seeing that evaporate and things can go back to the way they were, in centuries and millennia past. I mean, I guess one wonders how that leverage that we had, that we used collectively to achieve the societies that we had or have, will persist in the face of further technological advancements like, AI and robotics.